Welcome back to our DMSc Pulse of the PA podcast. This week we have Dr. Cohen, adjunct faculty, with us. He also works for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as an office within the Office of Inspector General. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great, thank you for having me.
And we also have Dr. Schuler here with us today as well, and we're really excited to just have a great, engaging conversation.
Good morning, Dr. Cohen. Welcome.
Good morning.
I think if we can just get started, Dr. Cohen, can you just kind of give us a little bit of background about your background as a PA, or even what you did prior to becoming a PA, and just your career trajectory as a PA?
I had kind of an interesting background in that I was kind of among the cohort of old school PAs when things were just starting to really take off in the profession. So I went to PA school in the early 80s, and almost everybody in my class, this was a second career for them. So everybody that I had in my cohort, they were prior medical technicians. We had some nurses and people that worked in varying areas of medicine, and this was a second career, so they were all in their 40s. I was one of the rare people that, fresh out of college, I went right into PA school, which is very common now, almost unheard of back in the day. I was one of the youngest people in my class. Back then, you had to have very strict 1,500 hours minimum of prior healthcare experience, which is why a lot of PAs entering the program had to have, some years before they got into the PA program. I started in EMS back, when I was 17. Went to EMT school in high school and went to paramedic school while I was in college. So I had years of experience in EMS before I even got out of college. And that's what qualified me to get into the program. But what's interesting back then is you had a 1 in 7 chance of getting accepted to the PA program back then. It was unbelievably competitive. Now people decide, oh, I'm going to be a PA, and you apply, and you have a high likelihood of getting in. Back then, people got turned down, and I went to school with people that had applied 3-4 times before they got in. There just weren't very many programs, and it was super competitive. The nice thing about back then is I trained with or under my mentors in the PA world were the original PAs, back from the 60s that were in the original model. They were former medics and had gone to PA school, and they were the real original PAs in our profession. So it was a kind of an interesting dynamic to learn from them. But it was a very different world back then. When we got out of school, it was very hard to find a job. There just weren't that many jobs available. And we had people taking jobs for $18,000 a year. That was common. There just weren't that many jobs, and you had to latch on to get experience in whatever was available. So I got lucky. My first job, I made like $23,000 or $25,000 working in an ER. And I wanted to do emergency medicine, so I was happy. And then it just evolved from there. I did inner city ER work, and then went to a private group that was contracted to do an ER, and that's where my career really blossomed. I eventually was the chief PA, which back in the 90s, again, that was unheard of to have that kind of a position. And then I went into urgent care and a private practice there, and it was a combination family practice, urgent care. I ran the urgent care side, and they made me the medical director of the urgent care, which was again, back in the 90s, unheard of. So that I really liked that kind of forward-thinking aspect of it, and I kept trying to push that envelope, but there just were not a lot of jobs available where PAs could kind of climb the corporate ladder. And then working ER for so many years, that has a shelf life. And after a while, I started looking for some other avenue to get out of the clinical world. And that's when I decided to go to law school. I was debating, should I do a master's or should I do something unique and different. So I added on law school and just banged my head against the wall trying to get into administrative medicine. All they saw was PA and tried to slot you into a clinical position. And that was very difficult. And I accidentally tripped onto one of my applications was to the federal government, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami hired me as an investigator, and loved the fact that I had a clinical background and a law degree. So I was able to work for them and get some experience, and then moved on to HHS-OIG. During that time, I also got my doctorate as well. But that was a really good mesh of everything that I had done up to that point. And that was very, very forward thinking also to get a job outside the clinical world. But prior to that, I'd literally put out like 40 resumes trying to get an interview to do something other than clinical medicine. And there was just nothing, absolutely nothing. So the world has really changed now. PAs coming out have a lot of avenues to go for. And that's how I evolved to the point where I am now in working for the federal government. I still do some clinical time, but primarily my main job is with the government.
Dr. Cohen, I'm curious. I've kind of always wanted to ask you this anyway. So, when you were working as a PA, what made you want to go back and get your law degree? What made you go back and get your doctorate, your DHSc? I was just kind of curious as far as what your path was and your thinking, because I think you had your law degree and then went back for your doctorate degree, right?
Yeah. So my thinking was severalfold. First of all, like I said, emergency medicine has a shelf life. I saw a couple of physicians I worked with that were 70-year-olds, and they were falling asleep at the table working overnight. And I'm like, that's not going to be me. So I wanted to find some other avenue to continue working healthcare, but I can't be doing, nights, weekends, and holidays for the rest of my life. So that was the first push to get out of the clinical world, was working in ER. The second thing was I really wanted to expand my mental acumen and my kind of spread my wings and do other things. And I also thirdly thought that our profession was kind of stuck in a rut. We're in this subservient clinical role, and we've been here for decades. I have been doing this for a couple decades, and I was watching nurses. They had a nice career ladder, and why don't we? So I wanted to try to push that envelope as well. So that was kind of the evolution of my thinking to try to get bring in other pieces of the puzzle here, the law degree and my doctorate, to be more marketable, I guess, because the PA degree by itself is not going to get you some big corporate job somewhere.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
You had the same question that I had, because I mean, you getting a JD, I just think that's such a valuable degree as a PA, and then going back and getting your DHSc on top of that. I mean, I can't imagine. How did you get into, I guess, and I'm not going to probably say this correctly, but I feel like you review cases now as a lawyer. Like, how did you get into that aspect of it as well, or defend people,
So when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I was hired as a fraud investigator. So where federal laws were being violated, we would work these cases civilly and criminally. So I did the grunt work of going out and doing interviews, compiling data, and helping to build a case. And I would work with one of the prosecutors. That was a learning curve, because those of us in medicine always think, well, doesn't everybody want to do the right thing? And the answer is no. There's plenty of people that don't do the right thing. I mean, a lot. There's also people that aren't in medicine that dip their toe in the water here. There's overseas actors that come over here, and there's organized crime involved in healthcare fraud. There's just a lot of avenues to steal from the government. We have a very trusting system here, and it's very easy to exploit federal payers. So I had to learn how to do that kind of work. And then I became attracted to be hired by Office of Inspector General, where the new Part D pharmaceutical program had just started. And they were finding just tons of fraud in that, and they needed somebody that knew medications and could work those cases. So I had a background in working cases, and I had medicine, so I knew all the drugs. So it was just a perfect storm for me. And I now have policy oversight of what we do in OIG nationwide with our law enforcement investigations over pharmaceutical frauds.
Wow, that's kind of a cool job. I like it.
And so, I mean, it just highlights that you know, there is life after clinical PA. There's a lot of you know, a lot of our students are fresh to the profession, and they're like, I don't see me ever doing anything other than clinical medicine. And quite frankly, I didn't either for almost 20 years, and that's fine. But at some point, it will wear on you, and you're going to want to do something different. Maybe you'll still do clinical medicine, but you're going to want to expand your brain or get out of clinical medicine altogether, own your own business, work in the corporate space, and do something, you know, differently as you evolve. And having the doctoral degree allows you that flexibility, because if you wait until, I want to get out and start looking for jobs, then realize you need a degree. Now you got to go get the degree, and that kicks the can down the road. Whereas if you get the doctorate now, it really helps a lot with if some opportunity were to come along, and those opportunities do come along a lot more frequently now than they used to. You're already there. You already have the degree. And I also believe that we need to stay competitive with other people in the profession, nurse practitioners, you know, pharmacists are all PharmDs, speech pathologists, physical therapists. They've all moved to the doctoral degree, and it's really critical we get out of this mindset that we just need to coast. We have to keep raising the bar with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably took me a while to kind of figure that out, you know, as well. I don't know if you know, I'm you know, similarly to you, I'm one of the old school certificate PAs as well. So, I mean, I think we'll all, when we get out of school, we do think we can probably practice clinically forever. And emergency medicine is difficult. I did that for quite some time. So it's, you know, it definitely makes for a difficult lifestyle long term, for sure. So, and you know, I think that the doctor definitely opens doors. I mean, Dr. Rolfs and I always talk about the 5 to 7 year itch, right, Jen? I mean, it's just, you know, it's almost like you walk in, you think you can work clinically forever, and then you kind of sit back and say, you know, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to keep doing this? You know, we're seeing so many PAs, even when we went to the executive leadership conference in so many administrative roles. It's pretty impressive to see. Can we talk a little bit about the highly anticipated healthcare law class for a few minutes?
I was going to say, like, we have to talk about the famous healthcare law class.
You know, it's, I mean, for me personally, and I always tell the listeners and the viewers on my info sessions, it was probably my favorite class, because I feel like, you know, I got a lot out of every class, things that I could utilize day to day, whether I was in education or, you know, was working clinically. I know that there's sometimes some fear behind the course, but I think that the content is absolutely fantastic and something that we can use day to day. So do you want to talk a little bit about just, you know, the course and how you structured the course and your thought process behind how you're delivering the content to the doctoral students?
So what I've realized,
I was going to say, and not to interrupt you, and we can talk about that, but can we also, I would love to talk about how you and Dr. Welsh kind of like had this vision of what this healthcare law class would be in the first concentration for the DMSc, because it's very unique. I think we're only one of a couple other DMSc programs that have the healthcare law class. So I'd love to touch on that too. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Let me hit on that first, and then I'll tell you my philosophy on the health law class. So Dr. Welsh and I did our doctorate together from 2009 to 2012. And we got to be really good friends and collaborators. We spent a lot of time together outside of class, working on things. And one day he said, "I want to run something by you." And I was like, "All right." And he said, "I have this idea that we should have a doctoral level education for PAs." And he articulated a really solid rationale as to why that should happen. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I'm like, first of all, why didn't I think of that? And then second of all, why didn't we do this several years ago? Because it makes sense. All these other professions are moving towards a doctoral degree, including at the time the NPs were making a big push towards their doctorate. And I was like, we're getting left in the dust. This absolutely makes sense. So he wanted to incorporate health law as part of the program, knowing my background. And I said, sign me up, I'm on board. And over the ensuing years, like I said, we graduated in 2012, and he went on to start and run some PA programs, all the while thinking about, starting a doctoral program. And we would touch base and collaborate over the years. And then he finally pulled the trigger and said, yeah, we're going to do this. So we did a lot of back and forth. I gave him my viewpoints on things, and he took some of the advice, not all of it, but hopefully some of what I had to say was helpful, and helped him bring forth his vision. And this was a long time in coming. This was just a brilliant idea, and my hat's really off to him for doing this. My philosophy on the health law class, probably from the very beginning of starting to teach students in our program, is that as a profession, we're very deficient in knowing about health law. So and this is not unique to the PA profession. Physicians are in the same boat. I tell my students, I don't care how much they bluster and act like they know the law, they were never trained in the law either. So they don't know any more than we do. When we are in our PA program, the bandwidth to do a lot of the policy and law stuff is too narrow. We don't have the bandwidth. Also, there's a lack of educators to be able to teach that aspect of it, and that is also true in medical school. So it doesn't get done. And then I tell the students, okay, that's the program's fault for not, or our profession's fault for not educating us in these important areas. But what did you do after you got out? You just avoided the law, hoping that you never got touched by it, when in reality, everything you do, every time you step into a practice, it's baked into the cake. You're practicing law along with medicine all day, every day. You just don't know it. You don't know it until you get sued. And then all of a sudden it's a big disaster. And then you're just along for the ride. You think the law is jaded and out to get us, and you don't understand the process. That's not the time to learn the law. So we need to learn it ahead of time, and it will help you modify your practice, because defensive medicine is not the way to go. There's other ways to be able to practice that are way better in defending yourself than just buffing the chart and running a bunch of tests. There's also a lot of federal and state laws that affect us. And I try to take a practical approach in the law class by giving scenarios, real life scenarios. I've distilled it down to just the relevant law that you're likely to touch in a clinical space. And there's still plenty, there's tons. And then you can work through a scenario that either you would experience as a clinician, or as a manager, or as an owner. So we work through all those different kinds of scenarios, and I teach process. How do you apply the law? I don't just tell you what the law says. I tell you how to use the law, how to distill it down to the elements, and how to apply it. Once you learn that principle, it doesn't matter what law you're using. So if a new law comes out, you already have the principle. Instead of me just teaching you about what a certain law says, you've learned the process, and that's enduring. That's something that you can take with you forever. And knowing the law is absolutely empowering. You could just, there's just so much, the world kind of makes sense. Everything that we do in medicine and in life that touches the law, it'll make sense after that. So students typically hate the class the first few weeks. You don't get a lot of sleep. There's a learning curve here that's unbelievable. A lot of reading. But then at the end, pretty universally, people are like, "Oh, this was needed. Why didn't I have this, years ago? How did I practice for 20 years and not know this?" So that kind of feedback we get. So it has a lot of value, and I think that our program is unique to offer such a challenging program. Instead of just throwing a couple laws and doing it superficial, and then a week later you totally forgot it.
Great. And you've had testimony from students. I mean, I don't know, you maybe will speak a little bit to that because they took the healthcare law class, they either were in a position that they were able to just communicate, improve their communication in their current position, or they were able to interview and get a position because of their knowledge from the healthcare law class.
Yeah, so every term I get a couple people that want me to fill out a reference for them. They want to go on to law school. That's how much they were inspired, which is really great. Then sometimes I get the opposite. People will say, "Oh, I thought I wanted to go to law school, and you convinced me not to." So that's fine too. But I love getting the emails, and I try to pass those on to Dr. Schuler when they come up. Sometimes it's while we're still in class, or it's afterwards. I'll get a former student that will reach out and say, "Oh my God, you were right. The very thing we talked about was the very thing that came up in our office setting or our hospital." And they went off on the wrong tangent with it. And I was able to correct them and tell them what the law really says and what the intent really is. So instead of being a fly on the wall and letting other people pontificate about what they think, and they're usually wrong, our folks are able to have a seat at the table and talk intelligently about health law related matters. And I get these emails over and over and over, which is very validating that we're on the right path here. Even though it's a really challenging and difficult class, at the end of the day, it has value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, being an alumnus and obviously taking your class, it's been a few years, but I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think as a student who, was one of those students, came in, really didn't know anything about the law. Being able to really understand it by you applying it to real scenarios, by applying it to what we do day to day is, PA clinicians, and it really kind of made sense, especially in the beginning, the way that you broke everything down and kind of set us up for the paper and so on and so forth. And I also think that your lectures are invaluable. When we're utilizing going through the course and utilizing those lectures and kind of tying that together with the immense amount of reading, I think really makes the course come together for sure.
Yeah, it helps the readings make more sense if you watch the video first. It helps kind of put it in the right bucket when you're reading everything as you move through it. So I think that I get emails all the time from students when they first start the class. "I'm so scared. I don't have any background in the law." I'm like, none of you do. You're not any different. Even if you've had a health law class before, not like this one. This one's going to be very different for you. So you're all starting at the same place, and that's why there's a lot of almost hand-holding. I'm giving you a lot of information, but trying to learn the vocabulary and learn how to speak law, as it were, can be very challenging, and people get scared about it. But I tell people, when you started PA school, the first time you were in anatomy and physiology, that was challenging. You had never contemplated all of those aspects before. When you did physics in college, I'm sure that was challenging, or calculus. You've had challenges before. You'll make it through.
Mm-hmm. It was pharmacology for me in PA school. It was just it's a new language. So
all of us had been there before. You just forgot about it. At the time, it was very daunting. You probably lost a lot of sleep, and it was very stressful. And now people were like, oh, the law is totally different. Now you've had challenges before, even in medicine.
Yeah. What would you, I mean, you've kind of given advice, but like you've been with us since the program started because you helped Dr. Welsh create the program. Over the years, I'm sure you've learned and evolved as an instructor and your method of instruction in the healthcare law class. What would you say have been your most biggest learning experience during all of this? Or what would you recommend to students who hear this is a challenging course, here are the top 3 things that I recommend you do to be successful in the course?
Yeah, so make sure you attend the live session. So every term I have a live session. It lasts a couple hours, but we outline how to be successful in the class, and we go over the paper. It's a legal-based paper, so it's very different than a regular research paper. But I show you exactly how to structure it. The biggest thing in this course is to stay ahead of the curve. So, in the beginning, when it says just do the introduction to the class this week, you should be reading. Make sure that you're way ahead of the curve. People that just tread water week to week have no extra bandwidth. So when life happens, my kid's sick, my car broke down, I got called in for overtime, now you don't have any buffer, and now you're behind. And then that's when it gets really stressful. If you're ahead of the curve, then when those inevitable things happen, you've got a little bit of a buffer, and then it's not so bad. So that's probably the biggest advice that I've had to give people and really push is to stay ahead. Do the reading. If you're done with this week's reading, do next week's. Just stay ahead of the tsunami.
Awesome. Well, I honestly feel like we are going to have you back for another podcast episode because I know we have future plans for the healthcare law class and maybe development of other courses based on feedback from students that have taken your healthcare law class. So I want to respect your time as I know you're very busy as well. And we've just had a wonderful conversation today. And do you have any parting words or anything in general for the DMSc program, PAs, moving us forward in our profession?
The only thing I would want to do is reiterate how important it is to get through this program and get your doctorate. I've been doing this for so long. I've watched an evolution in our profession, and you have no idea how many opportunities are out there for you if you can get out of the clinical mindset. And having a doctorate is really important to get people from just seeing you as a PA. For example, if you look at health insurance, that other side of the fence we don't know about, it's 2/3 bigger than what our clinical world is. There's tons of opportunities on that side of the fence. Entrepreneurships, corporate partners, moving up clinical ladders, even MSL. I mean, there's just so many opportunities now, and having that doctorate just opens up this huge world for you. So even if you're not ready to use that doctorate right now, you'll have it ready to roll, and it will help you in your day-to-day life. Even if you're a clinical manager, but it's the future of our profession, and it's important that everybody get that doctorate as soon as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you.